You ever think about the fact that you can make a Skitty and a Wailord make an egg together? Yeah. If you've been playing Pokemon for a while, you've probably done some breeding, maybe for a shiny, maybe for competitive stats, shit, maybe just to fill out your Pokédex, but have you actually ever stopped and thought about it? How weird is this system? Like I said, you can breed Skitty and Wailord, which the game never questions. You're never asked why you're doing this, and when you talk to the daycare person, they're just kind of standing there like, I don't know how the egg got here. And they do this every single time. Today, we're going to be going through the entire history of Pokemon breeding, how it started, how it evolved, and how it accidentally created one of the most dedicated collector communities in the franchise. This is going to cover the mechanics, the competitive side, shiny hunting, and yeah, we're going to talk about some of the secret economy of rare Pokeballs that some of you obsess over. So, let's start at the beginning. Now, Pokemon breeding was introduced in Pokemon Gold and Silver. Now, the concept was pretty simple. You put a female and male Pokemon in the daycare, walk around for a bit, come back, and you might have an egg. You hatch the egg by walking more steps, and you get a baby Pokemon. The species you hatch is always determined by the mother Pokemon, and that's been the rule since day one. But here's where it gets complicated and where some of these more complicated mechanics of breeding come into play, and that is egg groups. See, every Pokemon belongs to at least one egg group, pretty much always. Now, these egg groups determine what can be bred with what, and they're not based on something like typing. No, they're based on, honestly, I don't even know what they're based on. It's kind of hard to say exactly what they are. You've got groups like field, flying, water one, human-like, bug, mineral, whatever. Like, there's loads of these. Like, some make sense, like birds breed with birds and fish breed with fish. Others, not so much, because some of the egg groups you can breed is Skitty with a Wailord, Bidoof with Dragonite, and then Caterpie and Scizor. That should not work. But here's the reality of it. The game doesn't care. It only really checks if they share an egg group, and that's pretty much it. But then there is the undiscovered egg group, and this is for Pokemon that can't breed at all. Most legendaries are in this egg group, as well as mythicals and even ultra beasts, which kind of makes sense, right? As well as baby Pokemon. They have to evolve first before they can actually breed, which makes sense. But there are some weird exceptions. You see, Nidorina and Nidoqueen can't breed, even though they're pre-evolution, Nidoran can. And this has been in the game since the beginning. Most people think it's a reference to rhinos being difficult to breed in captivity. But here's the thing, the game never explains any of this. You just kind of have to accept it as the rule of the game. It's just kind of there. You don't really know why it's there, it just exists. But then there's a Pokemon that breaks this rule. There's a Pokemon that changes everything, and that's Ditto. See, Ditto can breed with almost anything, and it isn't in the undiscovered group. Male, female, genderless, it doesn't really matter. You can essentially breed Ditto with anything, which makes you think like Ditto is kind of like, I don't want to say it, but it kind of like the nasty one of the Pokemon community. The egg will always be the other Pokemon species and never Ditto, which means the one thing Ditto can't do is breed with another Ditto, which is kind of sad because how do they reproduce? How do they exist? Now, this immediately made Ditto into one of the most valuable Pokemon in the franchise, hands down. You need to breed something rare? Ditto. Need to breed a male-only or female-only Pokemon? Ditto. Need to breed something genderless? Ditto. Now, we'll come back to why Ditto became even more important later, but you just have to remember that he's super important just in general. Quick side note, something that you guys may have also realized when you play the Pokemon games is that the daycare person in every generation kind of acts confused when you get a Pokemon egg. They always say something like, "Oh, an egg appeared. I have no idea how it got there." Now, this happens every single time. You could collect 500 eggs from them and they'll still be shocked. Now, obviously, this is Game Freak dodging having to explain Pokemon reproduction, which kind of makes sense. I don't think they want to give you the birds and the bees in a children's game, but it's kind of hilarious that one of the most important biological systems in Pokemon and one of the most important mechanics in Pokemon at this point, which we'll get to, exists entirely outside of this like adult supervision. It's kind of an entire feature that exists there, and we know that a lot of video games, cartoons and stuff in the past as well, they do innuendos. They're kind of there, right? It's not really a weird thing or a strange thing that a show or a movie or even a game would do that, but it's kind of crazy that Pokemon, one of the biggest franchises, has something like that in the game and just kind of brushes it aside. So let's say now you have a Pokemon egg. Now you need to actually hatch it, which takes us to the actual concept of hatching in this game and how it functions differently from what most people would expect. See, every Pokemon species has what's called a hidden step count. For example, Magikarp only needs 1,280 steps to actually hatch, whereas some pseudo-legendary Pokemon like Dratini, Larvitar, and even Bagon use around 10,240 steps to actually hatch. But there is something you can do, which is if you have a Pokemon with Flame Body, Magma Armor, or Steam Engine in your party, that can actually make eggs hatch twice as fast, which is really cool because if you think about it, they're essentially using the concept of how you gotta keep like eggs in real life actually warm and heated, which is what like a chicken would do to its eggs to make sure that they stay warm and can actually hatch. This is also why everyone keeps a Talonflame in their party when breeding, because it's literally a fire bird that's going to keep everything warm, and if you have, like we said, Flame Body, Magma Armor, or Steam Engine, it speeds things up. And this is just one of many shortcuts. You see, later games added more shortcuts. For example, Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire had secret pals that could reduce the steps needed to hatch a Pokemon. Sun and Moon also had Pokemon Pelago, where eggs could essentially hatch passively without you even having to move around. But it doesn't change there. You can also see the game design actually influence how things are made. For example, there are subtle, really subtle choices made, and sometimes very obvious choices made, to the actual map design to help you as the player speed up the process. For example, daycares were always placed near really long or straight routes with no obstacles to make it easy to go back and forth to hatch it faster. You can see this all the way even from Ruby and Sapphire. And the most famous spot has got to actually be the battle resort in Omega Ruby Alpha Sapphire. See, the whole island is a perfect loop around the daycare, and you can just hold one direction and circle forever. And some people even figured out that you can essentially use like a rubber band or a coin on your controller to make this go automated and quicker. This is something I recently used. I actually have this lovely controller from GullyKit. Essentially, it allows you to use macros. You can literally set it up to go in one specific direction just by using these buttons, and that allows you to essentially automate the process of just going back and forth, which is crazy because back in the day, you couldn't do this kind of thing with a controller like this. If you use just a 3DS, you would have to essentially find an actual rubber band or coin to put here to allow it to just go on its own. And see, the game never does anything to stop you from doing these sort of things. It actually almost encourages you, and it lets you hatch hundreds of eggs if you want to, without the developers intentionally finding ways to stop players from doing it. But the question then is, why are we doing this? Like, can't you just catch Pokemon? Why even breed them? Well, there is a reason. Number one would be Pokédex completion. See, sometimes pre-evolution of a specific Pokemon is actually harder to find than the actual evolution, right? And breeding solves that problem instantly. See, if you want to get a living dex as a collector, breeding is kind of the fastest way faster than just hunting multiple rare spawns. And for a long time, certain baby Pokemon couldn't even be found in the wild at all, and breeding was the only way to get them back in the day. The second reason you'd want to actually do breeding is natures. I mean, yeah, natures are very important if you're a competitive player. I mean, natures affect stats. So obviously for casual play, if you're just playing Pokemon for fun and just going through the story, it doesn't really matter that much, right? For competitive though, or even just building a good team, it matters a lot. So imagine you finally find a rare Pokemon you want to use, but it has the adamant nature on a Chansey, which boosts attack, which Chansey doesn't use. Now, you could keep hunting, or you could breed it. So if you gave it an Everstone, the Pokemon holding that Everstone would then pass its nature 100% of the time down. So if you have, like, let's say a Modest or Bold Ditto, any Pokemon you breed with it can have that exact nature. Now this turned breeding into the perfect way to fix your potential bad luck when you're out there hunting for a Pokemon with a specific nature. And a third reason you'd want to have breeding or use breeding is for IVs, which are individual values. Now here is where it gets kind of a bit more serious, I would say. See, every Pokemon has 6 IV stats. Now, each IV then ranges from 0 to 31. 31, of course, being perfect IVs, which is what everybody wants. Now, for casual players, like myself mostly, this is kind of pointless, right? IVs are, as the name almost implies, invisible, right? They're kind of invisible. They're these individual values that you don't really care about. They don't really matter to you. But for a competitive player, they are everything. See, a Pokemon with perfect IVs versus one with bad IVs or average can mean the difference between winning or losing a match, and makes up a large chunk in difference between a good Pokemon and a bad Pokemon. See, before modern quality of life features were added to Pokemon to make things easier or the perfect stats and IVs to be reached, IVs couldn't be changed. You see, if your Pokemon had bad IVs, that was permanence. Breeding was the only way to get the strongest and best Pokemon you could. And there are a few items that actually changed up and really made it crazy how you could, like, you know, acquire the perfect IVs. For example, Destiny Knot. Now, this item changed everything for competitive players. See, when a parent holds a Destiny Knot, so the parent Pokemon has that item on it, 5 IVs are passed down from both parents combined. The 6th one, however, is random. Now, this turned the simple concept of breeding into almost like a math problem where the better IVs your parents have, the better your odds. And if you breed 2 Pokemon with perfect IVs, you have almost like a really decent chance of hatching offspring with perfect IVs too. And once you would then hatch, let's say a 5 or 6 IV Pokemon, it became your new breeding stock. So you would use that to make even more. And from there, the process would get faster and faster. Now, this is why Pokemon with perfect like stat spreads would actually spread out through the community so quickly. Like once someone has one, they would breed more and more of them and then trade them with others to make sure everybody else could get the perfect IVs they needed. Then you also have the introduction of the item bottle caps. You guys will know it if you play the game. Most of you, if you play casually like me, you'll get a bottle cap and just sell it because it gives you a lot of money. But if you're a competitive player, you know bottle caps really are important. However, there is one Pokemon that is the holy grail of everything, and that is the 6 IV Ditto. You see, for years, the ultimate breeding goal was the perfect 6 IV Ditto. Now, since Ditto breeds with anything, okay, a perfect Ditto turns into like this perfect Pokemon for breeding. But for most of the franchise's history, though, getting a legitimate 6 IV Ditto was basically impossible. Now, the odds were so astronomically low that most players assumed that anyone who had one of these like 6 IV Dittos either hacked it in using something like PK Hex, for example, or used like some form of like RNG manipulation. Then Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee came out, and this is where things changed drastically. You see, you couldn't even breed in these games, but they had something called catch combos. Now, if you caught the same Pokemon 31 times in a row, every Pokemon of that species you encountered would have 4 guaranteed perfect IVs. Combine that with these lures in the game, which would increase spawns, and suddenly hunting Ditto became super viable. It's no longer impossible to do it. You can actually get it done now. And the person who actually sent me this information for this video, they were the first person to ever get a completely legitimate 6 IV Ditto. They even wrote a guide on it, and a lot of people have actually used it to get their own 6 IV Dittos back in the day. And things actually change in Scarlet and Violet. You see here, they introduce these raids, and you could get a 6 IV Ditto from the 6-star raid dens. Basically, these guys have guaranteed 5 IVs and a 1 in 32 chance of being 6 IVs. So honestly, the myth eventually became reality. People could genuinely get a 6 IV Ditto, which made breeding so much easier. What about some other aspects of breeding that would be worthwhile, or why would people even interact with it beyond that? Well, there is a lot more. For example, egg moves. Now, egg moves are moves a Pokemon can learn through specifically breeding. Now, some egg moves just let you learn a move earlier than normal, and some other ones bypass needing a TM you don't have yet. But some egg moves are moves that Pokemon can't learn any other way, and for competitive play, some of these are essential. So some egg moves are obviously easy to get. You just breed 2 Pokemon that can both learn the move naturally, and some are way harder. For example, take Milk Drink on Skiddo. See, Miltank is the only other Pokemon that can actually learn Milk Drink, but Miltank is female only. Well, what's the solution? Well, you need a male Smurgle. See, Smurgle can sketch the move from a Miltank in battle, and then that Smurgle breeds with a female Skiddo, and boom, Milk Drink Skiddo. See, that's the kind of chain breeding players have been able to figure it out over the years. It's kind of insane. It's an entire meta on its own. But by the time you get to Ultra Sun and Moon, there are over 1,000 possible egg moves you can get. However, by the time we get to Sword and Shield, Game Freak actually ends up removing a lot of egg moves, especially the ones that overlapped with TMs or level up moves. But some exclusive ones got to stick around, and some ended up getting grandfathered in from older games. And a good example of this would be Charmander can actually have Air Cutter as an egg move, but only if you breed it from a Charmander that already knows Air Cutter, because the only way to get it was from a Gen 4 move tutor. And what would be the most exclusive egg move ever? Fanfy with Water Gun. Yeah, I didn't even know that. So there's egg moves, right? But there has got to be something else to it, right? Is it just for egg moves, just for beating for IVs? There's got to be something else because, well, what would other people do who are not into competitive? Well, you do have shiny hunting. And that brings us to the Masuda method, which is named after Junichi Masuda, the Pokemon developer who created this method and who, well, basically he told fans about it. He actually like revealed it to the world essentially when he introduced it and created it. And this man is behind the direction of many Pokemon games and is kind of the like one of the grandfathers of the Pokemon franchise, I would say. But here's the thing. The way the method works is as follows. If you breed two Pokemon from games in different languages, like let's say a Japanese Pokemon and an English Pokemon, the shiny odds increase dramatically. Instead of the normal odds, it becomes a 1 in 512. In later generations, this was improved further with the shiny charm, so you get even higher odds, but this created an entire international trading culture, especially back in the day, where players actively sought out foreign Pokemon to use as essentially breeding stock to try to get shinies quicker. So it kind of forced people to interact with people around the world to get the things they needed. Now, for some Pokemon, the Masuda method is the most efficient way to hunt for shinies, way more consistent than just randomly encountering Pokemon out in the open or even soft resetting. This is essentially the clearest and perfect example of the game rewarding players for working together and also for using this feature for something beyond just breeding for perfect IVs. You can now even shiny hunt. All right, now this is where things are going to get really deep, and I'm going to be honest with you, I didn't even know this, so it's a massive thank you to Cattle14 for actually writing this entire video, and specifically this section is the one where I got to give them the most credit. So let's get really deep into it. See, in Generation 6, X and Y introduced a new mechanic, which is breeding Pokemon could pass down the Pokeball they were caught in. I wasn't even aware of this, to be honest with you. Now, at first, only female Pokemon could pass down the Pokeball they were in, but in Sun and Moon, males of the same species could pass it down too. Now, this one rule created an entire essentially economy for these types of Pokemon, right? Pokemon in specific Pokeballs. See, most balls you can just purchase at a Pokemart, right? Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls. There's like an unlimited supply of these, but there are rare Pokeballs as well, which are kind of harder to get or exclusive. For example, the Dream Balls, right? Used to be able to catch Pokemon in Gen 5 in the Dream World. Apricorn Balls, which are made by Kurt in Johto. So that would be the Fast Ball, the Level Ball, Lure Ball, Heavy Ball, Love Ball, Moon Ball, Friend Ball, Sport Ball, which yes, there are usually distributions of these items in more later games like Scarlet and Violet or even Legends ZA. There are distributions of them, but they're limited, and just because you have them doesn't mean you're guaranteed to always be able to get the specific Pokemon inside of them. Then, of course, there's Safari Balls, which are used in the Safari Zone. There's Sport Balls used in the Johto bug catching context. There's Beast Balls used to catch Ultra Beasts in Gen 7. So as mentioned, some of these Pokeballs are limited in quantity. You can't like mass produce them unless you, again, you cheat in the games. But in later games, they're rare drops or even locked behind difficult content. But if you catch a Pokemon in one of these rare balls and breed it, the offspring inherits the Pokeball as well. And this also turned into a massive thing within the trading scene where people are specifically looking for rare and, even illegal combos of Pokeballs. And some Pokeball combos were harder to get than others. For a long time, for example, the rarest combos were fossil Pokemon in shop balls, stuff like Pokeballs, Great Balls, Ultra Balls. Why, you might wonder? Well, because fossils were only catchable in balls during Generation 5's Dream World. Once that shut down after X and Y came out, the combos were unobtainable unless you found someone who caught them before the shutdown. Now, when Sword and Shield's Crown Tundra DLC came out, most fossils became catchable again, including in rare balls like the Apricorn, Dream, Safari, Sport, and Beast Balls. But the Gen 4 fossils, Cranidos, Shieldon, Aerodactyl, stayed unobtainable until Scarlet and Violet's Indigo Disc DLC finally added them. Then there is Heavy Ball Beldum. Like, this is a really weird one. In the original Sun and Moon, Heavy Ball Beldum was essentially impossible. Like, the Heavy Ball has a catch mechanic based on weight, and Beldum is too light and has an absurdly low catch rate, which means that it was impossible to catch it. And the math literally made it, like, impossible, right? Now, Game Freak fixed this in Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon by giving the Heavy Ball a minimum catch rate of 1, still insanely hard, but now technically possible. Then there's also the Porygon glitch. When Crown Tundra came out for Sword and Shield, Porygon became catchable in Apricorn, Safari, and Sport Balls for the first time through Dynamax Adventures. Now, Game Freak actually ended up forgetting to update the legality checker, so for about a week, those Pokemon were considered illegal by the game's actual trade system, and you couldn't actually trade them online. They eventually did patch this though. And in, for example, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, Apricorn Balls were technically available, but only through very specific pre-order bonuses from certain retailers. In the US, for example, you could only get them from Amazon if you bought the double pack, and most players never really even got them. Then you also have, for example, the Sport Ball Lediba. Now, this is one combo that's still impossible, right? Lediba is a bug type. You'd think it would be in the bug catching contest in Heart Gold Soul Silver, right? But no, it wasn't included for whatever reason. And it hasn't appeared in any other game that has Sport Ball. So Sport Ball Lediba remains unobtainable to this day. And honestly, if you want to see the complete collection of all the, like every possible legal ball combo, the person who actually put together the script for me and sent me all this actually has a complete spreadsheet, and it shows you what's possible, what's not, and their own personal collection of every rare ball combo in the game. Now, I'll link this in the description if I remember to, but ball collecting went from this kind of like weird little cosmetic thing, because haha, it would be cool to have like a Pokemon with, you know, this specific Pokeball, to one of the by far weirdest, deepest metas in Pokemon that I think has ever existed, right? People literally track legality, rarity, and completion rates literally like it's a secondary Pokédex. It's kind of nuts. Which brings us to the modern breeding era. See, today breeding is easier than it's ever been. You've got mints, which lets you change the nature after the fact. You got bottle caps, which let you fix the IVs in your Pokemon. You got raid dens, which give you Pokemon with guaranteed perfect stats. Egg moves can be relearned or transferred between Pokemon, but breeding still hasn't disappeared. Why? Because it's still the most efficient way to mass produce specific Pokemon. You see, it is still the only way to pass down rare balls. It's still one of the most consistent shiny hunting methods, and honestly, some people just like it. And Scarlet and Violet in the modern era made some changes. You see, breeding, you now do it during picnics instead of at a daycare. Eggs now appear in your basket instead of you actually being handed them by a worker. But the core system of how it all works is still the same as it was in Gold and Silver. Put two compatible Pokemon together, wait, collect eggs, and hatch them. It's a simple concept, but it has endless depth somehow. Which is crazy, because Pokemon breeding started as a side mechanic in Generation 2 over 20 years ago, and players have turned it into a competitive breeding, shiny hunting, and whole secret economy for rare Pokeball collecting. It is crazy what people have been able to do with it, and Game Freak has kept refining it. They've actually, if you take everything that Game Freak does, if you take every bad decision they've made, somehow they have been able to keep this feature in and kept improving it over time, or at least adding to it in some way, or adding quality of life features to make it easier or more accessible. And they never removed it, because breeding isn't just about making Pokemon anymore. It's literally about you as a person having more control of what you want your Pokemon to be like. And if you want to know more about ball collecting, again, check out the legality spreadsheets, which will be linked down below in the description. And if you learned something new, let me know in the comment section down below, because I learned a lot of new stuff from this. Thanks to Cattle14 for sending me this whole thing. And if you want your own, like, stories to share, do it down below. Like, if you have some crazy breeding stories of things you did, or any shiny hunts that took forever, let me know down below. I'd love to hear about them, and thank you for watching.